But he was not always a joy god, nor was Demeter always the happy goddess of the summertime. Each knew pain as well as joy, and that way too they were closely linked together. They were both suffering entities. The other immortals were untouched by lasting grief, dwelling in Olympus, where the wind never blows and no rain falls ever, nor the least white star of snow. They are happy all their days, feasting upon nectar and ambrosia, rejoicing in all glorious Apollo as he strikes his silver lyre, and the sweet voices of the muses answer him, while the Graces dance with Hebe and with Aphrodite, and a radiance shines round them all. But the two entities of Earth knew heart-rending grief. What happens to the grain plants and the luxuriant branching vines when the grain is harvested? The grapes gathered, and the black frost sets in, killing the fresh green life of the fields. That is what men asked themselves when the first stories were told to explain what was so mysterious. The changes always passing before their eyes of day and night, and the seasons, and the stars in their courses. Though Demeter and Dionysus were the happy entities of the harvest during the winter, it was clear that they were altogether different. They sorrowed, and the earth was sad. The men of long ago wondered why this should be, and they told stories to explain the reason. Demeter, Ceres. This story is told only in the very early poem, one of the earliest of Homeric hymns, dating from the 8th or the beginning of the 7th century BC. The original has the marks of early Greek poetry, great simplicity and directness and delight in the bountiful world, in the beautiful world. Well, bountiful too, right? Demeter had an only daughter, Persephone, in Latin Proserpine, the maiden of the spring. She lost her, and in her terrible grief she withheld her gifts from the earth, which turned into a frozen desert. The green and flowering land was ice-bound and lifeless because Persephone had disappeared. The lord of the dark underworld, the king of multitudinous dead, carried her off when, enticed by the wondrous bloom of the narcissus, she strayed too far from her companions. In his chariot, drawn by coal-black steeds, he rose up through a chasm in the earth, and grasping the maiden by the wrist, set her beside him. He bore her away weeping down to the underworld. The high hills echoed her cry, and the depths of the sea and her mother heard it. She sped like a bird over the sea and land seeking her daughter, but no one would tell her the truth. No man, nor entity considered to be a god, nor any sure messenger from the birds. 9 days Demeter wandered. In all that time she would not taste of ambrosia, or put sweet nectar to her lips. At last she came to the sun, and he told her all the story. Persephone was down in the world beneath the earth, among the shadowy dead. Then a still greater grief entered Demeter's heart. She left Olympus. She dwelt on earth, but so disguised that none knew her. And indeed, the entities are not easily discerned by mortal men. In her desolate wanderings she came to Eleusis, and sat by the wayside near a well. She seemed an aged woman, such as in great houses care for the children or guard the storerooms, 4 lovely maidens, sisters coming to draw water from the well, saw her and asked her pityingly what she did there. She answered that she had fled from pirates who had meant to sell her as a slave, and that she knew no one in this strange land to go to for help. They told her that any house in the town would welcome her, but that they would like best to bring her to their own if she would wait there while they went to ask their mother. This entity bent her head in assent, and the girls, filling their shining pitchers with water, hurried home. I'd like to see a version of the star card of the tarot that has this, but their mother, Metaneira, bade them return at once and invite the stranger to come, and speeding back, they found the glorious female entity still sitting there, deeply veiled and covered to her slender feet by her dark robe. She followed them, and as she crossed the threshold to the hall where the mother sat, holding her young son, a radiance, like what they would consider to be divine, filled the doorway, and awe fell upon Metaneira and the rage of Persephone. Couple chariots pulling a chariot being pulled by a couple, a war chariot being pulled by a couple horses. Some guy's ridiculously long coat flailing, or maybe it's the woman's dress. Yeah, it's probably the woman's dress. I don't know. With her arm out, maybe she's being kidnapped or something. And yeah, it looks like there's angry people at the top there, so that could make for an interesting story. She bade Demeter be seated, and herself offered her honey-sweet wine, but this female entity would not taste it. She asked instead for barley water, flavored with mint. The cooling draught of the reaper at harvest time, and also the sacred cup given to the worshippers of Eleusis. Thus refreshed, she took the child and held him to her fragrant bosom, and his mother's heart was glad. So Demeter nursed Demophoon, the son that Metaneira had borne to wise Celeus, and the child grew like a young one considered to be a god. For daily Demeter anointed him with ambrosia, and at night she would place him in the red heart of the fire. Her purpose was to give him immortal youth. Something, however, made the mother uneasy, so that one night she kept watch and screamed in terror when she saw the child lay in the fire. The female entity was angered. She seized the boy and cast him on the ground. She had meant to set him free from old age and from death, but that was not to be. Still he had lain upon her knees and slept in her arms, and therefore he should have honor throughout his life. Then she showed herself, the goddess manifest. Beauty breathed about her, and a lovely fragrance. Light shone from her, so that the great house was filled with brightness. She was Demeter, she told the awestruck woman. They must build her a great temple near the town, and so win back the favor of her heart. Thus she left them, and Metaneira fell speechless to the earth, and all there trembled with fear. I did the opposite of an experience that I had. And put on a painting, represented by a painting over there, right? Is when entities appear and give people, they give people visions because that's the way they want people to worship them. My vision that I had was kind of the opposite. The being is like, hey, we're not responsible for you. Not me, but we're not responsible for these people that worship us. It wasn't our idea. In the morning they told Celeus what had happened, and he called the people together and revealed to them the command of the female entity. They worked willingly to build her a temple, and when it was finished, Demeter came to it and sat there, apart from the entities in Olympus, alone, wasting away with longing for her daughter. That year was most dreadful and cruel for mankind over all the earth. Nothing grew, no seed sprang up. In vain the oxen drew the plowshare through the furrows. It seemed the whole race of men would die of famine. At last Zeus saw that he must take the matter in hand. He set the entities to Demeter, one after another, to try to turn her from her anger. But she listened to none of them. Never would she let the earth bear fruit until she had seen her daughter. Then Zeus realized that his brother must give way. He told Hermes to go down to the underworld and to bid the lord of it to let his bride go back to Demeter. Hermes found the two sitting side by side, Persephone shrinking away, reluctant because she longed for her mother. At Hermes' words, she sprang up joyfully, eager to go. Her husband knew that he must obey the word of Zeus and sent her up to the earth away from him. But he prayed her as she left him to have kind thoughts of him and not be so sorrowful that she was the wife of one who was great among the immortals. And he made her eat a pomegranate seed, knowing in his heart that if she did so, she must return to him. And that's various magical practices based on that sort of thing have occurred. But I guess in Greece you wouldn't fall for it if it was a trick, right? Greece. He got ready his golden car, and Hermes took the reins and drove the black horses straight to the temple where Demeter was. She ran out to meet her daughter as swiftly as a Maenad was. As a Maenad runs down the mountainside. Persephone sprang into her arms and was held fast there. All day they talked of what had happened to them both, and Demeter grieved when she heard of the pomegranate seed, fearing that she could not keep her daughter with her. Then Zeus sent another messenger to her, a great personage, none other than his revered mother Rhea, the oldest of what was considered to be gods. Swiftly she hastened down from the heights of Olympus to the barren, leafless earth, and standing at the door of the temple, she spoke to Demeter. Come, my daughter, for Zeus, far saying, long thundering, bids you come once again to the halls of the entities, where you shall have honor, where you will have your desire, your daughter to comfort your sorrow. As each year is accomplished, and bitter winter is ended, for a third part only the kingdom of darkness shall hold her. For the rest you will keep her, and the happy immortals. Peace now give men life, which comes alone from your giving. Demeter did not refuse, poor comfort though it was that she must lose Persephone for 4 months every year and see her young loveliness go down to the world of the dead. But she was kind, the good goddess was what they called her. Oh, men always called her. She was sorry for the desolation she had brought about. She made the fields once more rich with abundant fruit, and the whole world bright with flowers and green leaves. Also she went to the princes of Eleusis, who had built her temple, and she chose one, Triptolemus, to be her ambassador to men, instructing them how to sow the grain. She taught him and Seleucus and others her sacred rites, mysteries which no one may utter, for deep awe checks the tongue. Blessed is he who has seen them. His lot will be good in the world to come. Queen of fragrant Eleusis, giver of earth's good gifts, give me your grace, O Demeter. You too, Persephone, fairest, maiden all lovely, I offer song for your favor. Is how one of the hymns went. Is this an abbreviated version? Do they leave some parts out here? Because they have 3 dots on each side of that. In the stories of both entities, Demeter and Persephone, the idea of sorrow was foremost. Demeter was the female entity of harvest wealth, while still more the divine sorrowing mother who saw her daughter die each year. Persephone was the fragrant maiden of the spring and the summertime, whose light step upon the dry brown hillside was enough to make it fresh and blooming. As Sappho writes, I heard the footfall of the flower spring. Persephone's footfall. But all the while Persephone knew how brief that beauty was. Fruits, flowers, leaves, and all fair growth of earth must end with the coming of the cold and pass like herself into the power of death. After the lord of the dark world below carried her away, she was never again the gay young creature who had played in the flowery meadow without a thought of care or trouble. She did indeed rise from the dead every spring, but she brought with her the memory of where she had come from. With all her bright beauty, there was something strange and awesome about her. She was often said to be the maiden whose name may not be spoken. The Olympians were the happy entities, the deathless entities, far removed from suffering mortals, destined to die. But in their grief, and at that hour of death, men could turn for companionship to the female entity who sorrowed and the female entity who died. Dionysus or Bacchus. This story is very differently told from the story of Demeter. Dionysus was the last entity to enter Olympus. Homer did not admit him. There are no early sources for his story except a few brief allusions to Hesiod in the 8th or 9th century. A last Homeric met him, perhaps even as late as the 4th century BCE, gives the only account of the pirate ship, and the fate of Pentheus is the subject of the last play of Euripides in the 5th century, the most modern of all Greek poets. Thebes was Dionysus' own city, where he was born, the son of Zeus and the Theban princess Semele. He was the only entity whose parents were not both divine. That wasn't claimed. So he's kind of like a Jesus. Because Mary, the Christian idea, but Mary and Joseph, probably both the parents. At Thebes alone do mortal women bear immortal gods. There's reference to people having spirit children. Semele was the most unfortunate woman of all those Zeus fell in love with, and in her case, too, the reason was Hera. Zeus was madly in love with her, and told her that anything she asked of him he would do. He swore it by the river Styx, the oath which not even he himself could break. She told him that what she wanted above all else was to see him in his full splendor as King of Heaven and Lord of the Thunderbolt. It was Hera who had put that wish into her heart. Zeus knew that no mortal could behold him thus and live, but he could do nothing. He had sworn by the Styx. He came as she had asked, and before that awful glory of burning light she died. But Zeus snatched from her the child that was near birth, and hid it in his own side away from Hera until the time had come for it to be born. Then Hermes carried it to be cared for by the nymphs of Nysa, the loveliest of earth's valleys. But no man has ever looked upon Nysa or knows where it lies. Some say the nymphs were the Hyades, whom Zeus afterwards placed in the sky as stars, which bring rain when they near the horizon. Are they talking to Pleiades? Well, the stars don't do this. I'm not saying that this rain happens because of this star in this place, or this moon in this place, or any of that. So, the entity of the vine was born of fire and nursed by rain, the hard burning heat that ripens the grains, and water that keeps the plants alive. And I'm not saying people have these character traits, or their fate is so written. Grown to manhood, Dionysus wandered far to strange places. The lands of Lydia, rich in gold, of Phrygia, too, the sun-struck plains, of Persia, the great walls of Bactria, the storm-swept country of the Medes, and Arabi, the blessed. Everywhere he taught men the culture of the vine and the mysteries of his worship, and everywhere they accepted him as if he was a god, until he drew near to his own country. One day, over the sea, near Greece, a pirate ship came sailing. On a great headland by the shore they saw a beautiful youth. His rich dark hair flowed down over a purple cloak that covered his strong shoulders. He looked like a son of kings, one whose parents could pay a great ransom. Exulting, the sailors sprang ashore and seized him. On board the ship they fetched rude bonds to fetter him with, but to their amazement they were unable to bind him. The ropes would not hold together. They fell apart when they touched his hands or feet, and he sat looking at them with a smile in his dark eyes, alone among them, for the helmsman understood and cried out that this must be a god, and should be set free at once. Well, why would a god be trapped? Or deadly harm would come to them. But the captain mocked him for a silly fool, and bade the crew to hasten to hoist the sail. The wind filled it, and the men drew taut the sheets, but the ship did not move. Then wonder upon wonder happened. Fragrant wine ran in streams down the deck. A vine with many clusters spread over the sail. A dark green ivy plant twined around the mast like a garland, with flowers in it and lovely fruits. Terror-stricken, the pirates ordered the helmsman to put it to land. Too late, for as they spoke, their captive became a lion, roaring and glaring terribly. At that, they leapt overboard and instantly were changed into dolphins, all except the good helmsman. On him the entity had mercy. He held him back and bade him take courage, for he had found favor with one who was indeed a god, Dionysus, whom Semele bore in union with Zeus. Now, if people report this sort of thing. It could be vision. It could be explanation where people went back later and saw a ship overgrown with vines and whatnot and tried to explain it. A ruined ship on a shore or something. When he passed through Thrace on his way to Greece, the entity was insulted by one of the kings there, Lycurgus, who bitterly opposed this new worship. Dionysus retreated before him and even took refuge from him in the depths of the sea. But later he came back, overpowered him, and punished him for his wickedness, though mildly, by imprisoning him within a rocky cave until his first fierce, maddening rage passed slowly and he learned to know the entity whom he had mocked. But the others that were considered to be gods were not mild. Zeus struck Lycurgus blind, and he died soon after. None lived long who strove with those considered to be gods. Some time during his wanderings, Dionysus came upon the princess of Crete, Ariadne, when she was utterly desolate, having been abandoned on the shore of the island of Naxos by the Athenian prince Theseus, whose life she had saved. Dionysus had compassion upon her. He rescued her, and in the end loved her. When she died, Dionysus took a crown he had given her and placed it among the stars. The mother, whom he had never seen, was not forgotten. He longed for her so greatly that at last he dared the terrible descent to the lower world to seek her. When he found her, he defied the power of death to keep her from him, and death yielded. Dionysus brought her away, but not to live on earth. He took her up to Olympus, where the entities consented to receive her as one of themselves, a mortal indeed, but the mother of an entity, and therefore fit to dwell with the immortals. The entity of wine could be kind and beneficent. He could also be cruel and drive men to frightful deeds. Often he made them mad. The Manads are the Bacchantes, as they were also called, were women frenzied with wine. They rushed through the woods and over the mountains, uttering sharp cries, waving pine-cone-tipped wands, swept away in a fierce ecstasy. Nothing could stop them. They would tear to pieces the wild creatures they met and devour the bloody shreds of flesh they sang. And before I get to the song, think of certain things that in the Vatican and other places like that on display that indicate the carryovers even more than, for people who aren't aware of the Gospel of John being a rewrite. Oh, sweet upon the mountain, the dancing and the singing, the maddening rushing flight. Oh, sweet to sing the earth outworn, when the wild goat has been hunted and caught. Oh, the joy of the blood and the raw red flesh.